He's a guy from Chicago that's lived inside the Beltway. He doesn't understand Virginia government.
The Obama administration has been going after you. David Axelrod, as you know, on Meet the Press, and you were a guest as well with him, he accused you of balancing the budget by tapping into $1.7 billion from the stimulus program,
right, borrowing
$3 billion from the transportation fund that will have to later be paid back, and borrowing billions from the pension fund as also. So what is your response?
Well, David was just flat wrong. I mean, look, he's a guy from Chicago that's lived inside the Beltway. He doesn't understand Virginia government. I think his handlers gave him some talking points. The bottom line is we had a $6 billion deficit over the last 2 years, and largely through cutting spending, we balanced the budget, had a surplus, and Washington doesn't. Washington is $14 trillion in debt and heading towards $20 trillion. Now, he's correct to the degree that the stimulus money helped every state for a short period of time, a year and a half. But that certainly wasn't $6 billion. It was a much smaller amount. And in a couple of those years, it offset some other cuts. But he's absolutely wrong about $3 billion. That was for transportation infrastructure, not ongoing operations. And that's the problem with Washington. They're taking out the federal government credit card to fund operations. We use a very small amount of debt to fund capital infrastructure. And that's what you do. You mortgage your house, you don't use the credit card, but when you're buying pencils and pens and paying for daily expenses, you gotta have the cash to pay for it. And that's the fundamental difference. So unfortunately, he's wrong. What's happening is Republican governors are making great strides now, making the tough calls, and balancing their budgets. That's a foreign concept to David Axelrod and the people inside the Beltway that haven't balanced the budget in years and years and years. We've got to do it. No excuses, no kicking the can down the road, no expansion of debt limits. We have to be responsible. And so it's just a fundamental difference between the way Washington works and the way we work here in the States.
Until the Supreme Court rules on the constitutionality of Obamacare, states, including Virginia, are going to have to implement many of these costly provisions. Don't you think the Supreme Court acted irresponsibly by not making an expedited ruling on this, and instead they're letting the Obamacare go through the lower courts, and while Virginia and other states are going to have to implement a lot of these provisions?
Well, it's a very good point, Jason. Obviously, we were the first state to sign a bill, one of my first bills to ban mandates like that in Virginia. We were the first state to sue, the first state to get a affirmative decision from the Supreme Court, from the federal courts. And of course, the responsible thing to do was to request the Supreme Court to immediately hear the case, because we need certainty and finality. And frankly, no matter whether you're for or against Obamacare, we should want to have an answer so that people can go on there with their lives. The doctors, the nurses, the businesses, the health insurance companies, everybody ought to know what the rules are. And so we asked the Justice Department to join us, and they refused. And I think that's why the Supreme Court made the decision that they did, because we asked for it, the Justice Department opposed us. Had we had a joint motion supporting it, I think maybe the Supreme Court would have had a different response. So it's disappointing. This is, I thought, the perfect kind of case under Rule 11 of the rules of the Supreme Court, of a matter of such national importance that we would want to have expedited review. So it's disappointing. And I don't know whether they didn't want an answer. The Obama administration, maybe didn't want an answer before the election, or what their reason was, but it wasn't, I didn't think it was a meritorious position. So we're disappointed. We are going to try to have an expedited hearing through the Fourth Circuit, and then hopefully our case and the Florida case and these other cases will be heard together in the United States Supreme Court, and we're certainly hopeful that we'll get a good ruling.
So Virginia, though, has to implement many of these provisions while the law remains in limbo.
Yeah, that's a good point. While the big fiscal impact of Obamacare takes effect in January of 2014, that's the individual mandate. That's what gives us $2 billion in unfunded mandates on Virginia by the year 2022, is this expansion of Medicaid in 2014. But in the meantime, you're exactly right. We've had to hire people. We've had to set up, or in the process of setting up exchanges, health exchanges. It'll take a couple years to do. We've had to change insurance regulations. All that takes staff, time, money in order to do, which is the main reason we wanted the expedited review, because there may be a lot of things we're spending money on that we don't have to do if we win the ultimate case. And so that's disappointing. In the meantime, I feel like I'm under the law, and I've got to go ahead and start being ready for January of 2014. Hopefully it won't be implemented, but if it does, I got to be ready.